Yes, I will be recording this. I probably won't be publicizing the recording, but if you'd like access, hi Rick, if you'd like access, just ping me afterwards. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. We're off and running. Welcome to this webinar, the death of field sales. I'm glad so many of you could join me. Just some housekeeping before we get started. I'm happy to take questions as we proceed, and there's two ways that we can do that. You can type a question in the chat window, and I should see it pop up there, and if so, I will answer it. Alternatively, what you can do is raise your hand. Those of you who have your hands raised currently, maybe lower them. Just click on the pick list and choose clear my status from the bottom. I'll try and keep an eye. I'm not sure if those people who raise their hands will pop to the top. If so, I'll see you. If not, I may trouble to. So if I don't, just say I have a question in the chat window below. I'll either answer the question right from the chat, or I will enable your audio, give you voice, and if you have a microphone, you'll be able to go ahead and ask it live. If you don't have a microphone, of course, please just type the question in the chat window, and I'll answer it as soon as I see it there. So this morning's webinar, a fairly provocative title, The Death of Field Sales. So we'll be talking about a new approach to thinking about sales, what I'm referring to as the inside-out approach, and I'll also be presenting what I'm calling a 12-step program to kick the field sales addiction. And for many organizations, I really think that field sales is an addiction, one that's very difficult to back away from. So there's only a certain amount of tongue-in-cheek in the subheading there. Okay, so let's dive in. So there's a hyperbole alert to start with. Obviously, this event's titled The Death of Field Sales, but I don't really have it in for field sales, as the title might suggest. But what I do have it in for is the automatic default assumption that sales is something that happens outside. So the message this morning is not that we should eliminate salespeople. The message is that we should start thinking differently about the sales function. And I'd like to encourage you to think about the sales function as something that's essentially inside. So let's explore that for a minute. There are two paradigms here. The old paradigm, and I'll explain why in a moment, was that sales was something that happened out there in the field. And you all know what that means. You know, traditionally, if an organization wanted sales, they would employ a salesperson. The salesperson would operate outside, where customers are, and consequently, sales would essentially be an outside function. And there are all sorts of problems associated with that, as well as benefits, and we'll talk about them later. But I'm suggesting it's time to usher in a new paradigm. And the new paradigm is that sales is an inside function, or more correctly, that sales is essentially an inside function, with on occasion outside components. So the new paradigm brings with it a new set of rules. And I've numbered 4 of them here for you, but there are more. So this is a summary of some of the points that we're going to cover as we work through this webinar this morning. And number 1, centralize everything that you possibly can. Number 2, commit to the internet as your primary source of sales opportunities, or to the web more correctly. Number 3, add outside salespeople only when you absolutely must as a last resort. And number 4, eliminate commissions and all performance pay. And I'm sure many of you watching this webinar know my position, long-held position on performance pay. And today I will make it clear exactly why I hold that position and explain the linkages between that and the move from an outside sales function to an essentially inside sales function. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of history to develop an understanding of why a new paradigm is required. So historically, sales was something that was done outside, and sales was done outside for a good reason. And the reason is that outside is where our customers were. So 50 years ago, there were no fax machines, there was no internet, of course there were no video conferences. If we wanted to communicate with our customers effectively, we had to go out in the field to where they were to communicate with them. And any communications that weren't out there in the field where our customers were less effective as a consequence of the distance. But of course now we're operating in a completely different environment. The fax machine initially, and then internet, and now video conferencing and other technologies are essentially resulting in our clients being almost inside. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Historically, if you were dealing directly with an organization, talking to their headquarters, the quality of information that you were getting from that organization would almost certainly suffer as a consequence. Today, however, in most cases, if you're talking, if you're communicating with someone in the field, the quality of information you're receiving is almost certainly suffering as a consequence. I ride a bike on occasion, and I'm interested in buying a new bike currently, a Scott Foil 30 for those of you who are cyclists. And I've noticed that I can discover much more information a lot quicker about that bike if I research online than if I go into a bike shop. I've popped into a couple of bike shops that sell that model, and on each occasion I've been disappointed that the salespeople on the floor have access to a fraction of the information, at least at their fingertips, than I do when I'm researching that bicycle. So the market dynamics have changed significantly. Customers are no longer outside in the same sense as they were previously. So today, your customers are essentially inside. There's no longer the tyranny of distance there was previously, and there's no longer a requirement in many circumstances, not all, but in many circumstances, to have a salesperson who essentially ferries data backwards and forwards from the head office to the customer's location. Now, there are real costs in having outside salespeople in an inside world. Or to be more correct, I should say there are real costs in depending upon outside salespeople in an inside world. So remember, my message is not that field salespeople shouldn't exist. My message is that the sales function should be viewed as essentially an inside function. So what happens when we don't? What happens when we continue to perpetuate the paradigm that sales is something that happens outside? Well, the first thing that happens is our costs are higher. For the very simple reason that labor costs are higher if we have our workers out there in the field. So if you have a capable inside salesperson, they cost X number of dollars per year. Almost certainly, if you replace that person with a field salesperson with similar experience, similar capabilities, the cost is going to be 50 to 100% more. But number two, field personnel perform far less activity. So a telephone-based person can have 20 easily, probably more likely 40 or 50 meaningful contacts with existing or potential customers on the telephone each day. A field salesperson typically will have 2 a week. Even if we push them hard, as we do in our traditional approach to field sales, we can push salespeople to the point where they're doing 4 appointments a day, 5 days a week, or 20 appointments a week. But that's still a fraction of what an inside salesperson, the number of meaningful conversations that an inside salesperson could have. Now, of course, the default assumption is that the quality of conversation in the field is so much better than the quality of conversation inside. But I'm sure all of you can think of circumstances where that hasn't been the case, where you've been able to deal with someone internally and have a conversation that was on par, if not better, in quality terms than the one that you would have with someone in the field. In fact, many customers nowadays resent the fact that organizations want to send them salespeople. They would prefer to transact with you online via the telephone or via the internet. The next problem, and this is one that's not so easily recognized, but probably more insidious, is poor integration. So here's what happens. If you treat sales as essentially an outside function, and you employ salespeople where each salesperson essentially becomes their own independent sales function, what inevitably happens is you have poor integration between sales and the rest of the firm. And when I'm using the term sales in this context, I'm using it rather loosely to refer to the entire interface between your organization and your customers. So what happens is if your sales function consists of 1 or more salespeople who operate out there in the field autonomously, the integration between them and the rest of the firm is poor. And what do I mean by integration? Well, in the old days, organizations used to make stuff, queue it up, and then sell it. So there was very little requirement for integration between sales and the rest of the organization because salespeople were selling from a queue of inventory. And that queue of inventory buffered the requirement for integration. But nowadays, increasingly, we're operating in an engineer-to-order or perhaps a make-to-order environment. In many cases, that which the customer is ordering hasn't been produced until they place an order, and in some cases, it hasn't even been designed. So as we move from a make-to-stock environment to a make-to-order or even an engineer-to-order environment, there's a requirement for very tight integration between the customer and your organization. When we have salespeople out there in the field operating autonomously, we necessarily end up with poor integration because salespeople out there in the field are busy and they're remote from the rest of the firm. The last problem that occurs is selective engagement. Now, as I hinted in the previous point, when salespeople operate autonomously, they tend to be busy, and the reason they're busy is because integration with head office is so difficult, they tend to take responsibility for so many activities themselves, and you've all seen it, I'm sure. You have salespeople out there in the field. Their business cards would suggest to you that they would just be selling. But the reality is they spend much of their time doing customer service tasks, assisting with production, expediting as it's called, performing clerical activities and so on, that they have very little time available to engage with the marketplace. So the consequence of this limited capacity is that salespeople tend to engage very, very selectively with potential customers. Salespeople have this activity they refer to as qualification. And salespeople are adamant about the fact that qualifying potential customers is a value-adding activity. So they genuinely believe that the more aggressively they qualify, the more effective they are. And then that may be true when you take into account their limited capacity. But what we need to recognize is that salespeople's approach to qualification inevitably involves confirming that potential customers have both the budget to purchase and are currently in the process of making a purchasing decision. What that means, of course, is they disqualify everyone who can't answer yes to those two questions. What it means is they're failing to engage with a lot of prospects they probably should be engaging with. And those they do engage with, they arrive late at the party. And by late to the party, I mean that by the time your salespeople engage with your customers, they discover that your customers or potential customers have already engaged with your competitors, meaning that the size of the deals that will likely be won are smaller, and the margin in deals that are won is also eroded by that competitive environment. So my point is, if it's not absolutely necessary for you to be selling in the field, you should be selling inside, because there are significant costs associated with selling outside when you could be selling inside. So I created a little decision tree here to give you some guidance as to when it's okay to sell inside and how to identify those circumstances where it really does make sense to have a field-based salesperson. So it goes like this. We start with a sales opportunity. And we ask ourselves, well, is this a new client or is it a potential client? Is it a new client or is it a returning client? If it's a returning client, we then ask ourselves, is this a new service line or is it a repeat purchase? If it's an existing customer making a repeat purchase, my point is there's a weak case for an outside salesperson. If it's a new customer or if it's an existing customer buying a whole new service line, then the next question is this a high-risk purchase for the customer? Are there a lot of intangibles? And if the answer is yes, then I'm suggesting there's a good case to have that opportunity handled at least in part by a field salesperson. So what do I mean by a high-risk purchase? Well, the answer's in brackets there, a lot of intangibles. Now, there can be two types of intangibles in selling situations. There can be technical intangibles, but there can also be commercial intangibles. So it may well be that your customer is looking, let's assume you're a printer, your customer might be looking to purchase a set of business cards. But if that customer has the potential to purchase a significant amount from you, let's assume it's a division of General Electric that just approached you, you may well recognize that there's the potential that what's really in play here is not an order for a set of business cards, but a relationship with General Electric. And you might then conclude that what we're talking about is not an opportunity to generate $200 in revenue, but an opportunity to potentially generate $200,000 a month in revenue. Now, if you're on the brink of that kind of commercial engagement, it may well make sense to say, well, this is a high-risk purchase, even if the customer at first point of contact believes that what they're purchasing from you is a set of business cards. So this decision tree isn't as restrictive as it sounds, but it does put you in a position where the decisions that you make have to be justified. For example, if you have a salesperson go and prosecute that opportunity to sell a $200 set of business cards, and you find yourself in a position where there isn't in fact an opportunity to generate $200,000 a month in revenue, then you have to question whether or not on the second occasion you would do that again. Because certainly you add a lot of friction to the transaction by causing the customer to have to talk to a field-based salesperson in order to purchase a set of business cards. In fact, our advice nowadays in situations like that, if you receive a simple order, process that order on the telephone, and if you think that the new customer has potential, push a salesperson out after the fact, rather than involving a salesperson in that initial transaction. So that's a general indication or a way of thinking about those situations, identifying those situations when outside sales is required. So before we talk about what this new sales environment, the new sales function might look like, let's handle a couple of objections. Maybe not objections that you guys have, but objections that many of your colleagues would likely have. And the most common one is more of a question than an objection. And the question, of course, is, well, what about relationships? Aren't sales all about relationships? Now, the interesting thing about this question is people ask the question without ever questioning the assumptions underneath the question. And I think the reason that they do that is perhaps instinctively they recognize that if they were to try and expose the assumptions that underlie that question, it would be very hard to do so, or the assumptions would be very flimsy. So people ask me that all the time, or even present this as an axiom, as an indisputable statement. They say to me, Justin, after all, sales is all about relationships. Which my answer is, well, is it really? I thought sales was about customers securing a product or service they want at a reasonable price with a high degree of confidence with respect to product performance and delivery lead time and so on. To my mind, the relationship piece is not significant at all. Now, it is true that organizations or individuals within organizations do end up with relationships with customers, but notice the choice of words. They end up with them. They don't start with them. Now, if you think that relationships are the cause of customers, then think about this. Have you ever recruited a salesperson who works for your competitor, expecting that that salesperson would bring a whole bunch of you as customers with him? Or conversely, have you ever been terrified that one of your salespeople is about to leave and lived in fear that when they leave, they will take with them the greater majority of your customers? So because we work with a lot of organizations, we see both of those situations play out over and over again. We see organizations who employ salespeople expecting them to bring their Rolodex with them. And we see organizations who lose salespeople to their customers, to their competitors. And I've got to tell you, in both cases, the results are almost without question surprising. New salespeople always fail to deliver the volume of new accounts that their managers expect them to. And existing salespeople who leave always fail to take with them the number of accounts that they expect to. And the reason for that is that relationships do not, for the most part, create sales. Okay. Now, you can always identify one or two situations where that isn't the case, but for the most part, relationships are not the antecedent, if you like, to sales. It's the other way around. You go out there and you sell someone something, and as a consequence of delivering that service over a period of time, you end up developing a relationship with them. So the relationship is more likely to be the consequence, the effect, than it is to be the cause. So in most situations where relationships are concerned, clients will invest in relationships only when they don't pay a premium or when they don't suffer any inconvenience. So of course, that's just a nice way of saying that clients, for the most part, are not interested in investing in relationships. They may like them, they may appreciate them when they have them, but for the most part, they're not prepared to invest in them. In fact, what you're more likely to find is if your potential customers have a personal relationship with your salesperson, they're more likely to demand a discount than they are prepared to pay a premium. So the relationships that we should be interested in here are not personal relationships between your customers and your salespeople. The relationships that you should be interested in are the relationships between your customers and your organization, and those relationships are called commercial relationships. And commercial relationships are exactly the type of relationship that your business is in the business of developing and maintaining. I remember many years ago, I don't know when automated telling machines were introduced into the US, but I think they were introduced to Australia maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And I remember the media storm prior to the introduction of automated telling machines. Uh, um, there were critics in the media talking about the fact that automated telling machines would destroy the relationship that customers have with the banking teller. No longer would we have the opportunity to go into the bank and develop a close working relationship with the individual behind the counter. Now, I suspect most of us, if we had a choice today of losing the automated telling machines and going back to having a relationship with a teller, or keeping the machines, I'm pretty sure most of us would opt to keep the machines. So customers, for the most part, don't want relationships. They want products and services delivered fast at competitive prices. And our job in business is to focus on the latter, delivering products and services fast at competitive prices. The more we do that, the more we're likely to be immune to the relationships that our competitors' salespeople, personal relationships that our competitors' salespeople are attempting to build with their customers in the vain hope that it will provide them with lock-in. So here I have for you a preview of what I'm calling the inside-out sales function. So this is what the sales function can and should, I believe, look like if we build it starting with the assumption that sales is essentially an inside function. So this is a lot to swallow in one take. So let me work through it in steps. Okay, so everything starts with customer service. So we've been working with organizations for many years now, as you know, helping them to re-engineer their sales functions. And in the last 5 years or so, what we've recognized is that pretty much any organization we work with, we need to start with customer service. Because in most organizations, customer service is a weakness. And it can't afford to be a weakness if you want to move to an inside-out sales function. So the reason customer service is a weakness for most organizations is that salespeople, for the reasons we discussed previously, own the customer relationship. The reason they own the customer relationship is that the interface, the quality of the interface between salespeople and the rest of the organization is poor, so it's much easier for salespeople to become the primary point of contact with customers, to own the customer relationship. If we're talking about moving sales inside, the first thing that we have to do is to move customer service inside, and then we need to make sure that customer service is robust. Most customer service teams we go into are under-resourced, and they're full of people who lack the confidence that's required and the authority that's required to do a good job of customer service. And the reason for that, of course, is that they've always been usurped in the past by salespeople who may not have customer service in their title, but who are regarded by everyone, including themselves and the customer service representatives and the customers, as being responsible for it. So the first thing that we need to do is to build a really robust customer service team. Now the team might be just 1 or 2 people. It doesn't matter, as long as we have plenty of protective capacity in customer service. So customer service has to have enough protective capacity to be able to cope with peak times. The customer service team should be responsible for order entry, should be responsible for issue management and general job management. By general job management, what I mean is keeping an eye on the jobs as they flow through the system at a high level. So they should be able to see orders coming in, being converted into jobs and leaving on time, and they should be in a position to raise the white flag on occasions that they see that the promised lead times are likely to be breached. Customer service should also, in most cases, be responsible for the generation of simple quotes, or even where complex quotes are involved. If engineering produces an estimate, then it makes sense in most cases for the estimate to go back to customer service and customer service to turn it into a proposal. Okay, so we have a team there. That team has to be robust, so it has to be properly resourced. These individuals have to be properly trained. They need to be using technology as opposed to post-it notes and manila folders. By technology, I mean every single case, every case without exception, must be entered into either ERP or CRM. And the flow of cases must be monitored on at least a daily, if not a twice-daily basis. So we'll talk a bit later on about the importance of WIP meetings, work-in-process meetings, and that's relevant to a few of these departments, particularly customer service. Now, if salespeople are with customers, they need to understand that they are no longer responsible for customer service. What that means is if a salesperson is sitting with a customer and a customer says, hey, I have a problem with my first order, the salesperson's response should be to get a customer service representative on his or her cell phone, put the cell phone on speaker mode, upend it on the table, introduce the customer service rep to the customer, and to allow the customer service rep in the salesperson's presence to take the details of the issue, to create the issue in ERP, and to take ownership of it so that they can resolve it and report back to the executive with an outcome. It's only necessary for salespeople to do that once or twice before they recognize that it makes much more sense for them to introduce customers to customer service, but more importantly, customers only have to do it once before they recognize that it makes a lot more sense to talk to customer service if they have issues than it does to talk to salespeople. So if we look at the flow there, we have customer service who are converting transactions for the most part into customer outcomes. So not just transactions, but also requests for quotes. So we have requests for quotes, transactions and issues going in, and we have factory orders or orders and other customer outcomes, resolved issues coming out the other end. So that's customer service. And remember what I said, everything starts with customer service. If we're working with an organization, until the customer service team is robust, we will not build anything else. And surprisingly, in many cases, we've discovered, and Elena, who's on this call, is working with a client at the moment, cases where we need to add a significant amounts of capacity to the customer service team in order to cope with the flow of orders and RFQs. And when that occurs, it's a very positive thing. It can be difficult to add people. But if you need to add a significant number of people to your customer service team in order to cope with the flow of work, almost certainly what's going to occur is the quality of service that you're delivering to your customers will increase significantly. Now, if you do something that causes a significant increase in the quality of customer service, in other words, a reduction in quotation lead time and a reduction in order lead time, almost certainly what will happen immediately is your customers will reward you, whether they mean to or not, by providing you more work. So this is one of the easiest ways to increase the flow of inbound sales opportunities, fix customer service, believe it or not. So let's turn our focus now to inside sales. So we have customer service receiving inbound calls. And if you like, we have customer service triaging whatever work they possibly can from that flow of inbound calls. So if it's a request for quote or if it's a simple order, they will process it on the telephone. If it's something more complicated than that, what typically happens is they will escalate it to inside sales. So inside sales, rather than processing transactions, are interested in prosecuting sales opportunities. Sales opportunities are those situations where a customer doesn't know the part number that they want to order, but they do understand the problem that they want to solve. So there's salesmanship involved here. The salesperson needs to listen to their concerns, develop an understanding of their environment, and make a recommendation or two and secure the sale. So that's the difference between the kind of call that will be handled by a customer service person and an inside salesperson. So we have the inside sales team that on day one might consist of just one or two people for many of you. We have the inside sales team taking calls that are routed to them from customer service that are inbound sales calls, but we also have the inside sales team making outbound sales calls. So what we're going to do is we're going to deliberately over-resource the inside sales team. If we discover that we need 2 inside sales people to cope with the inbound sales opportunities, then we're going to add 3 inside sales people. And we're going to either have one dedicated inside salesperson doing making outbound calls, or more likely we're going to share the outbound calls amongst the inside sales team. So in that case, 30% of the inside sales team's calls will be outbound calls as opposed to inbound calls. So the outbound calls will be calls to existing customers, encouraging them to trial a new service line. It'll be calls to existing customers, suggesting to them that they haven't purchased line X in a while, so therefore they must be running low. Would they like to make a purchase? And it'll also be calls to potential customers, inviting them to trial a line or inviting them to request a sample or whatever the case is. or to place an initial order with a tremendous incentive to do so. So an interesting point where inside sales is concerned. Even if your transactions are significant enough that it's justified to have field sales, in many organizations today, we're finding it easier to generate sales opportunities for field sales with outbound inside sales activity. In other words, we're finding it easier to win a new major account by starting with a small initial transaction that is originated and prosecuted inside, and then identifying that we've just sold something small to a big organization and having a salesperson go and engage with that big organization on the back of that small initial transaction. We're finding in many cases that's a far more effective way to get into large organizations than it is to have field salespeople attempting to hit up the executive team. As we'll discuss later, it's just not possible in many cases, or realistic in many cases, for salespeople to approach the executive team direct. So the next function to examine is promotions. So in most organizations, promotion is a very small function. And the reason for that is in most organizations, there are more than sufficient sales opportunities lying around already. And by lying around, I mean really lying around. We talked about salespeople qualifying aggressively before. We also suggested that the sales function is under-resourced. Salespeople are busy, and if there are customer service people, they are also running ragged. When we resource the sales function properly, two things occur. Number one, we have the capacity to handle all of the sales opportunity, or to handle more of the sales opportunities than we currently do. And number two, we eliminate qualification. In other words, if someone is a potential customer, we will engage with them regardless of whether or not they have budget right now and regardless of whether or not they're currently in the process of making a purchasing decision. Both of those things increase significantly the number of opportunities you have on hand. Now, at some point, you will get to a point where you need more sales opportunities, and at that point, you have a requirement for promotions. So promotions practically is one or maybe two people who are responsible for taking both the relationships with existing accounts that you have and for reaching out direct to the market and generating sales opportunities. So that involves running simple campaigns to generate sales opportunities for both the inside team and perhaps the field team, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, increasingly, one thing that we need to recognize, and this is another reason why we need to be skeptical about sales as an outside function, is that increasingly today, and I think most of you on this call are in the US, but more in the US than in other countries where we've worked, it is almost impossible today, as I suggested previously, to pick up the phone and engage directly with senior executives. They simply won't take your call. So among salespeople, there's still this feeling that there's something noble about cold calling. And among the experienced old dog salespeople, there's still a handful who maintain that they do cold call and they do generate sales opportunities from cold calling. But I've got to say, I saw time in organizations, in sales teams, in and around sales teams than anyone I've ever met. And it is very rare for me to identify a salesperson who is busy, who generates the greater majority of his or her sales opportunities from cold calling. The fact of the matter is simply not a productive way of generating sales opportunities. If you want to generate sales opportunities today, you should be looking one place and probably one place only, and that is the internet. We learned that the hard way ourselves when we came and set up in the US. And when we set up here about 3 years ago, we didn't have a database of 15 or 20,000 interested individuals like we had in Australia. So we had to start with a clean sheet of paper. And I experimented with everything here, with reaching out cold to executives, with exhibiting at trade shows. And the last thing that we invested money in, well, we even spent $6,000 a month on a PR firm for 6 months or so. The last thing that we turned our attention to has been the most productive by a long shot, and that is simply using pay-per-click advertising to generate sales opportunities online. So if you're not online currently, and by online I don't mean Facebook and LinkedIn and everything else, I mean selectively engaging in the small number of online activities that do genuinely generate sales opportunities. If you're not, you genuinely should. That is the future as far as I'm concerned. So the last piece to what I'm calling the inside-out sales function is field sales. Now, as many of you will know, we regard field sales as a component with two parts. We have the salesperson out there in the field. And then behind the salesperson, back in head office, we have a sales coordinator. Now, the sales coordinator is essentially an executive assistant for the salesperson. So let me explain how the economics work, because for many of you, this will be a little worrisome the way that it looks right now. If we were to go and if we were to come and sit with one of you guys, and we were to discover that you had a team of 5 salespeople out there in the field currently, almost certainly what's going to happen, and I'm sure you can guess from looking at this diagram, is that that sales team would be reconfigured. The end result, without question, would be that you would have one person out there in the field. And you would have a bigger customer service team and a bigger inside sales team, and perhaps an extra person in promotions in due course. Now, with the amount that you save on the sales team, it is a relatively small undertaking for you to add an executive assistant for that salesperson. But the benefits of doing that are enormous. Here's the thing. A salesperson operating autonomously, because they're so involved in customer service and everything else, will perform about 2 business development appointments a week. And if you have field salespeople, I'd hazard a guess that's approximately the number of face-to-face business development meetings they're doing currently a week, 2. If we provide that person with an executive assistant who takes responsibility for anything that the salesperson was previously doing that could reasonably be done in the office, then we can easily push that person from doing 2 business development appointments a week to 20 business development appointments a week, a 10 times increase in productivity. So what I'm saying is if we go into an organization that has a team of 5 field-based salespeople, reduce that team down to 1, that one salesperson will do 20 appointments a week, which is twice the volume of appointments that was previously being done by the entire field team. And the number one thing that we've done to enable that is to provide that person with an executive assistant. Of course, we've done more than that. We've built a more robust customer service team, and we've built an inside sales team to handle repeat transactions and so on. Okay, but now we're starting to see the whole picture. So let's examine the flow. We start with a cold market, and the job of promotions is to reach out to the cold market and to generate sales opportunities. Also to reach back to existing accounts and to generate opportunities from them too. Those sales opportunities get fed to inside sales to generate transactions and perhaps to field sales. But in many cases, as I mentioned previously, we're using inside sales to generate transactions, and the transactions actually generate the sales opportunities that are prosecuted by field sales on the occasion that there are opportunities that are significant enough to require prosecution in the field. In other words, those complex ones with lots of intangibles. The transactions are handed to customer service, and customer service turn those transactions into customer outcomes. And transactions are 2 types. There's orders, and then there's customer service issues. So that's what the flow looks like as a whole. So it looks pretty, but of course, we need to pay some attention to, does it work in reality? Now, it does work in reality, but we need to recognize that there are challenges. And the challenges that we face with this model are purely a consequence of this model representing a move from sales as an individual pursuit to sales as a team pursuit. In other words, what we're doing here is we're applying, whether we like it or not, we're applying division of labor to the sales function. Okay, so we've seen organizations on many occasions that have inside sales teams and who have customer service teams. But what they tend to do is segment their customers. So what happens is the field salespeople talk to their A customers, and inside sales talks to their B customers, and customer service talks to the C customers. Now, if you think about it, that's a ridiculous approach, because your A customers are not just the customers that will benefit most from talking to field salespeople, they're also the customers who will benefit most from talking to inside salespeople and from having access to customer service. So the only thing standing in the way of that, of course, traditionally has been that salespeople operate autonomously. And if we gave customers access to inside sales, field sales, and customer service, that would require that your customers had 3 conversations concurrently. I'm not suggesting that approach, though. I'm not suggesting that we segment our customers. I'm suggesting that we segment our resources. In other words, that we apply division of labor. What that means then is that we have to design our environment such that our customers have just one conversation. But they're having the conversation across three different resources in our organization. If they're engaged in a major transaction with lots of intangibles, they're talking to a field-based salesperson. If they're making repeaters that are relatively simple, then they're talking to inside sales. If they're simply placing an order, they're talking to customer service, or in many cases, they're transacting online or sending the order by fax or email. So the challenges we have are the challenges that are inherent in division of labor. And to sum that up, what we have to be able to figure out how to do is to synchronize all of the parts of the sales machine. All of these resources have to work together and have to present themselves to the customer as one single conversation. So there are two keys to making that work in practice. Number one, where field sales is concerned, you'll have noticed already that we don't have the field salesperson running his or her own show. The field salesperson always has an executive assistant. The executive assistant, or sales coordinator as we call them, always lives and works inside with the rest team. So the salesperson's calendar is managed by the sales coordinator, and all of the opportunities that the salesperson is involved with are also managed by the sales coordinator. And there are two reasons why we have the sales coordinator. The first, of course, is that the addition of a sales coordinator increases significantly the effective capacity of the salesperson. But the second reason is that having the salesperson managed by a sales coordinator who lives internally makes it possible, makes it so much easier for us to synchronize what's going on in the field with what's going on internally. So once we've synchronized inside with outside, what's left is for us, of course, to synchronize what's happening internally. And there are two ways that we can achieve that. The first way that we can achieve that is to put our inside sales resources in close proximity to one another. Rather than having them in their own offices, have them sitting in a large open area where they can listen in on each other's calls, they can chat to each other between calls and so on. So ideally have them working in cubicles with very low vanity screens so that they can look over the screens and communicate with each other and, as I said, listen on each other's calls. The next trick is to have daily 10-minute stand-up meetings or work-in-process meetings. So we learned this trick from the manufacturers that we work with, and this is very common in technology companies too. These meetings are commonly called Scrum meetings in technology environments. So whenever we work with an organization, with an inside sales team, with a customer service team, we take the lead from manufacturing, and we say once a day, sometimes twice a day, we're going to have a stand-up 10-minute meeting. And the purpose of that meeting is to synchronize the team internally, but also to synchronize the team with the rest of the teams that make up the organization as a whole. So typically what happens with one of our clients is that the factory will have their WIP meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning. After the factory work in process meeting, we'll have a customer service WIP meeting. And we'll have someone from the factory, and more likely someone from procurement, attend the customer service meeting. We'll then have the team leader from customer service attend the inside sales meeting that happens immediately after the customer service meeting. And as a consequence of having that series of WIP meetings at the beginning of each day, we end up synchronizing the organization as a whole. So Jeffrey's just asked a question. He says here, it sounds like these are three different conversations by definition. They differ dramatically in complexity. So I think Jeffrey's referring to the three different functions we talked about before, inside sales, customer service, and field sales. And Jeffrey, you're absolutely correct. There are actually the three conversations are quite distinct in most cases, and that's why it's not really that difficult in practice to synchronize. It's not as difficult as you would expect. So, for example, if a senior executive from a client organization is thinking of entering into a supply agreement from you, the type of conversation they're having with you is radically different from the type of conversation that they would be having, or that one of their underlings would be having with a customer service representative placing a simple order. So when I say organizations want to have one conversation, I mean at the highest level imaginable. It's not necessary for an executive from a customer organization to know the intricacies of the order flow, but they would like for the person they're talking to have some context. So synchronization isn't as big a challenge as salespeople believe that it will be when we first present this idea of division of labor to them. It's a challenge. I mean, customer service needs to know what's happening to some extent in inside sales, and field sales needs to know what's happening to some extent in the rest of the organization. But there isn't a requirement to have absolute efficiency, as the CRM vendors would have us believe. It's not necessary for a field salesperson out there in the field to be able to look at the order flow on an item-by-item basis. You're absolutely correct. Okay. Let me know, Jeffrey, if that's clarified it for you. Great. Okay, so there are a couple of other points that I need to make in order to figure out how to make this work in practice. The first follows naturally from the point that I was just making about division of labor, and that is that for this model to work in practice, we need to eliminate performance pay. So this is an old conversation for me. We've been eliminating performance pay in the organizations we work with for years. Increasingly, certainly the bigger companies we work with, we discover that when we got there, they'd already figured out for themselves how caustic it was and eliminated it. If they haven't, then we have them eliminated. Now, the reason we eliminate performance pay is quite different from Dan Pink's reasons. I'm sure many of you have read Drive, Dan Pink's book, and it's an excellent book, and he points out, he references studies, theoretical studies or academic studies that demonstrate that performance pay inhibits the performance of knowledge work. In other words, the findings of the studies that Dan Pink quotes is that performance pay only improves the productivity of individuals if they are performing mindless, repetitive work. It actually inhibits the performance of individuals if they're performing knowledge work. And I would like to think that most sales activities are knowledge work. But that's not the reason why we have been eliminating performance pay for years. Yes, we're aware of the fact that for the most part it doesn't work. But the reason that we've been eliminating it for years is because it's caustic in a team environment. Now, if you think about it, we used to have performance pay in manufacturing. 50 to 100 years ago, workers in a production environment were paid on a piece rate. And in fact, today you can still find some instances of piece rate pay. For example, in textiles. If you had a textile company, you might sub out some of the sewing to individuals who work from home, and you'd pay them on a piece rate, X number of cents per seam, or whatever the case is. But 50 years or so ago, in traditional production environments, piece rate pay was eliminated. The reason it was eliminated is piece rate pay may or may not, it's debatable, increase the efficiency of individual workers, but it decreases the efficiency of the team. And the reason for that is the efficiency of a team, or the output of the team, is not the sum of individual outputs. You don't make a team perform faster by making every individual on the team perform faster. You make the team perform faster by better synchronizing the individuals. Think of a rowboat. The key to making a rowboat, say a scull with multiple oarsmen, the key to making a rowboat move faster is not to get the oarsmen to row faster, it's to get the oarsmen to row together. Performance pay destroys teamwork because it causes individuals to operate in a vacuum. So we eliminate always performance pay in the environments we build for exactly the same reasons that performance pay was eliminated in production environments 50 plus years ago. And that reason is that simply we're moving from sales as an autonomous endeavor to sales as teamwork. And in an environment where we have teamwork, piece rate pay or performance pay simply doesn't make sense. Of course, I'm not talking about profit share here. I'm talking specifically about commissions or performance pay, where the amount that somebody gets paid is either directly or indirectly a function of their individual output. Now, the next step to making it work is to do some planning, and some reasonably detailed planning. It would be nice to say the diagram that I showed you previously, you could simply take it and plug and play it in your organization, and to some extent you probably can in a lot of organizations. But more often than not, and these may just be the cases that we hear about, more often than not there's some customization required. So I'm pointing here on the screen to a model that we built for an organization we're working with currently. And you can probably recognize all of the components from the standard model that I presented to you previously. We have a customer service team at the top here. We have account managers, which is the inside sales team here. We have the promotions function here. We have the field team here. Now, in this case, the field team consists of an executive assistant, a salesperson, and also 3 project leaders. And the project leaders in this case are an extension of the design team, and design is just another word for engineering. So it may be necessary for you to customize the standard model that I've presented to fit with your own organization. The fundamentals should remain the same, but the final resourcing model may be a little different. So that's a requirement. And the second requirement is that once you've built the high-level model, there's a requirement for you to map the critical workflows. So if you think about it, there are a few prerequisites for division of labor in any environment, not just sales. Production, projects, even an orchestra or an airport. One of the prerequisites is specialization, that's self-evident. Another prerequisite is the centralization of scheduling, which we've discussed. And another is standardization, so standard workflows. So it's necessary for you to identify each of the key workflows. I mean, you can see from the discussion we've just had that there will be a field sales workflow, an inside sales workflow, a customer service workflow, or a number thereof, and a promotional workflow. All of those workflows have to be standardized, they have to be mapped, and somebody has to go to great care to make sure that those workflows are executed in line with the mapping. And the metrics that are used to manage the organization need to also be integrated with that. The reason for that is that it's critical that the machine that we're building is synchronized, at least to some extent. And these are the inputs into that critical synchronization. So in a moment, what I want to do is introduce you to what I jokingly referred to as, maybe not so jokingly referred to as a 12-step plan from freeing yourselves from the grip of field sales. So I've got 12 steps that I think you need to work through to make the transition from sales as an outside function to sales as an inside function. Before I do that, I want to take 2 minutes of your time to detail briefly for you what we call a solution design workshop. So I just finished talking about the fact that the two first steps, I have a question here. Somebody's asking, when you eliminate commissions from salespeople, what typically happens to base pay? So I should have mentioned that. Salespeople, like anyone else in your organization, should be paid what they're worth. They should be paid their market rate, plus some additional, plus a bit. Okay, and that applies to anyone in your organization. It doesn't matter whether you're employing an engineer, it doesn't matter whether you're employing a new receptionist. What you need to pay them is essentially the market rate plus a bit to make it appealing for them to come and work for your organization and less appealing for them to leave. Salespeople are no different. So if you have a salesperson who's earning a base of 60, but when you add commissions in, on average is earning 120 from year to year, obviously when you eliminate commissions, you need to pay them at least what they've been earning for the last few years, averaged. So if they've been averaging $120,000 a year, then you pay them $120,000 a year. Somebody's asking, Marco's asking, do you reward the team instead of the individual? Well, I'm a little bit cynical when it comes to rewards, full stop. Simply because my experience has been that rewards don't have the input on the impact on behavior that everyone expects them to. Take bonuses, for example. What I've found, and this is corroborated by many of our clients, is that if you put in place a bonus plan, the first year the bonus check is a pleasant surprise. In all subsequent years, it's treated as an expectation. So, yeah, I think where the team as a whole is concerned, or the organization as a whole, there's a lot more people who know a lot more about that than I do. Bruce asks, how does the holistic strategy change, if at all, where the field sales organization supports a reseller channel? Okay, that's a good question. In the case of a reseller channel, what I would encourage you to do is to go to my blog and read the chapter that talks about resellers. So there is a different approach, quite a different approach, and I simply don't have the time to discuss it today. So if you're selling through a reseller network, then most of what we've discussed today, certainly all of the principles make absolute sense. But what you really need to do yourself a favor and go and read the chapter in my upcoming book. It's freely available on my blog that talks about selling through a channel, and it explains how we customize this model to suit. So we're talking about how to get started with the inside-out model. The first step was to design a resourcing model. The second step was to map all critical workflows, and so on and so on. We have, and I'm going to take two minutes here to bend your ear and tell you about this service that we provide. It's called a Solution Design Workshop, and after this, we're going to work through the 12-step plan to free you from field sales. We call it a solution design workshop. It's a one-day engagement. We work through these steps here. It's yours truly, me in other words, on your premise, with your team for a day, working through these 5 steps, designing the resourcing model, mapping the workflows, etc., etc. You can see on the screen there. Now, what I'm going to do is give you an opportunity to request an overview of that. I'm not going to tell you all about it today, but if you're interested in it, you can simply click a button on this screen here, click the yes button, and immediately after this call, within an hour after this call, I will send you an overview, along with a credit voucher if you're interested in what we call a solution design workshop. So click yes or no, and there we go. I think we've got almost everyone. I'll put this slide up again at the end, but just click yes or no, and I'll get this to you immediately after the workshop. Okay, I think we've got most of you. Well, thank you so much. Now, moving on, the 12-step program. How do you make the transition? So there's a lot of detail, but it's important we don't get buried in the detail. These are the high-level steps that you need to make to take in order to make the transition from an outside sales environment to an inside sales environment. So the first is all about customer service, as we discussed. Number 1, create a customer service team. Make sure it's resourced properly. Route all repeat orders and all issues. Emphasis on the word all to the customer service team. Now, this needs to be mandatory, not optional. You know, people say to me, how do you get salespeople to do X? We don't have any trouble getting salespeople to do things that make logical sense, whether it's routing orders to customer service teams or whether it's updating their executive assistants after they performed each meeting. And the way that we get them to do it is we make it mandatory. We put them in a room and we tell them that they don't have an option, they must do it. And if the organization's sales manager is too spineless to do it, then I will go on premise myself and I will say to them, you have no choice, you have to do it. Does anyone have a problem? Salespeople will go and they will do it. One of the problems we find is organizations or management is so used to acquiescing to their salespeople that they find it very difficult to make the transition like this because they forget who runs the organization. Number 3, we're going to route all inbound calls to the customer service team, and the customer service will triage inbound calls and escalate those calls that really deserve to be escalated. They genuinely can't handle to the inside sales team or to the sales coordinator. And then the last thing we're going to do is build a build a register. So this is a technology task, a register of all customer service jobs, and we're going to review that daily as a team. So this is the daily work in progress meeting that I was talking about previously. We want to be able to look at a log of all of the work that's in the system. We want to see its performance to plan. And for those jobs, whether they're jobs literally or whether they're issues or RFQs that are likely to run behind schedule, we want to plan what we're going to do to get them back on schedule again, and that needs to occur daily, sometimes twice daily. The rule of thumb is if your production team has a twice daily work in progress meeting, then your customer service team should also have a twice daily work in progress meeting. So after we've fixed inside sales, step number 5, customer service, we're now moving to inside sales. Find or recruit 2 or more inside salespeople. We like to start with 2. The reason we like to start with 2 is that the environment is a lot more pleasing for the inside salespeople if they're working with a colleague than if they're working alone. Also, particularly if you don't have an inside sales role currently, this can be a risky role to recruit for. So it's better to start with 2 and at least have someone left should you lose one. Number 2, convert inside salespeople into customers' primary point of contact. Now, we need to be careful with this term primary point of contact because for the most part, your customers are clever enough to be able to figure out for themselves that if it's a new transaction, they're going to talk to a sales coordinator. If it's a significant transaction, they're going to talk to a sales coordinator. If there's sales input required, they'll talk to inside sales, or if it's just an order, they'll talk to customer service. But if there's a default, if there's a situation where customers aren't sure who they should call, then we would like them to call inside sales first. Number 7 is centralize the management of all sales opportunities. So you need to use a CRM for this, and this model here will provide you with significant benefit from your CRM. it'll probably provide you the benefits that you signed on for when you bought the CRM and never got. Number 8, allocate only discrete tasks to field sales. Only have reps perform those activities that absolutely cannot be performed inside. And what that means typically is have field reps performing nothing other than face-to-face business development opportunities. And as with inside sales, build a register of sales opportunities and review them regularly as a team. Daily or weekly, perhaps we'll do an inside sales. So the last step in the last 3 steps in the 12-step program, and I think this is pretty much our final slide for today, relates to field salespeople. So step number 10, retain only those field personnel who you're comfortable, you can easily maintain at 100% utilization. Okay, if you are only comfortable that you can generate 20 business development appointments a week, you should only have 1 field salesperson, irrespective of how many you have today. I don't care if you have 2 or 200. If you are comfortable that on day 1 you can only generate 20 field appointments a week, after customer service and inside sales triage the inbound inquiries, then you should only have 1 field salesperson. I don't care if your territory is Ontario or if it's the whole of North America. The second last step, if possible, keep sales activity inside and perform only technical tasks in the field. So if you don't have to have salespeople in the field, but you do have to have someone in the field, then that's fine. Have sales handled inside and have 1 or 2 technical people who do perform technical tasks in the field. And the last step in making the transition, if it's necessary to sell in the field, get for your remaining salespeople executive assistants who manage their calendars for them, who own opportunities, and who perform all of the field-based activities associated with sales. So that was the final slide for today. I have a couple of moments left for questions if anyone has one. Please either put your hand up or Dean, I don't know if you had your hand up. I will give you voice just in case. If anyone else has a question, please type it in. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me this morning. When we close, I'll leave thank you all. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I hope that's been of value. I will be sending you an email containing a copy of the extract from my book, as well as a 2.5-hour access to a 2.5-hour video that goes through a lot of this information in a lot more detail. You'll get that in your email in just a few moments. Thank you so much for joining me. All the best.